was young enough to believe that leaving a city would let me leave myself. The days were copies. Same streets, same colleagues, same applause and same silence, and my mind started buzzing like a fluorescent tube that never fully turns off. The fix I chose was distance. Heat, new money, humidity, unfamiliar insects, and a coastline where the air tasted like wet copper. I booked the flight and pretended that a week would be enough. My brother's calendar cracked open by accident, so he came too. We moved side by side through markets where the fruit looked lacquered. We ate what was handed to us and drank what arrived beaded in condensation. For 3 days I performed the ritual a tired mind learns. Walk until the thoughts thin out. Watch until the body gets quiet. Sleep beside an untroubled window unit whose breath erases all dreams. But there was another reason I'd cross the ocean. I had a habit of following fear the way other men follow money. At home, I'd already run my shoes thin on graveled service roads and fenced-off lots, tick-tock ruins and whispered addresses that ended in nothing. It had gone stale. I told myself the world must carry older shadows farther from the glow of my own language. We asked questions the 4th day, not the kind that earn smiles. Street by street, stall by stall, we tried the loose key of curiosity in human locks. Most faces were kind and blank in the same way. I heard the polite evasions that exist in every language, the ones that gently push you back toward the tourist grid. It was the season of damp shirts and grit on the teeth. By late afternoon, we had mostly collected shrugs. I stepped into a corner bar because the inside was cooler. The counter bent like a horseshoe, and the bottles made a stained glass sound when the fans stirred their collars. The owner had the expression of someone who can tell a hometown by the way a person sits. He recognized the continent I'd come from, the way I owned my vowels. I recognized his, too. The conversation was the small, practical kind that floats above the real one. He worked. I watched. The night turned itself on outside. At some point, I pushed the question back across the wood between us, not with hunger, just with a kind of tired honesty. He listened with his eyes on the sink. People always listen better when their hands are busy. He was not a man of ghost stories. He didn't pretend to have legends pinned under glass. He had only directions, which are more dangerous than legends. He mentioned an industrial strip on the edge where the neon surrenders to fields. Not an address so much as a way to align yourself. A shuttered factory like a long metal coffin, and near it, higher up where brush chews at the slope, a small concrete house that shouldn't be lit after dark, yet is. The rest was the usual caution, the way one adult speaks to another when the outcome is no longer anyone's responsibility. Fences, security, don't trespass. Look from the road. If you feel watched, give the watching something harmless to see, and then leave. We left with a map that wasn't a map, just the memory of a finger moving in the air. Outside, street lamps hung at uneven intervals as if the city had been stitched with bad thread. A cab idled and I hired it before I could reconsider. The driver nodded like a man agreeing to lift a couch. He spoke enough of my language to make things comfortable. We showed him the written hint we'd built out of the bar owner's directions. He squinted the way anyone does when they've heard of a place and are deciding whether to admit it. The road became a thinner idea of itself. Asphalt loosened into patches. The cab's air conditioning made a white cave where the night couldn't touch us, and for a few minutes I slept, or something like it. A shallow gray where the body reloads. When I opened my eyes, the windows had gone black and wide. We no longer had buildings, only suggestion. Cut grass, a brief silvering of irrigation ditches, a low shoulder of trees. The driver would not go further. He stopped as if his tires touched a rule I couldn't see. He spoke with the voice people use to keep their own fear calm, the one you might use with a dog during thunder. We negotiated time the way you negotiate with heat stroke. 30 minutes, then back. 2 fares for the return, if he waited. He agreed the way someone agrees to take the trash down the hall. He lit a cigarette and pointed with it toward the dark. We walked toward the shape of metal in a field. The factory had the geometry of a storage container rolled out to the length of a block. A fence stitched its outline like a scar. The gate was locked, but age makes its own doors. We slid where others had flattened wire before us. The air changed inside, thickened by the smell of rusted rain. Old machines keep a memory of thunder. The weeds were high enough to reach a knee and low enough to keep our ankles honest. Bats arranged the air above us without ever touching it. The world had the hollow sound of places that no longer produce anything but themselves. I have loved this part all my life. The first turns around a dead building, the tempo of the heartbeat figuring out how fast it needs to be. We didn't find anything except a map of neglect, broken panes, a belt of oil hardened into tar, graffiti and alphabets that didn't bother to finish their letters. I felt the familiar little sadness of a hunt that yields only someone else's footprints. And then the hill made itself known. The factory sat like a beached freighter, and behind it the land lifted, forming a shallow horseshoe of scrub and stone. At the low seam where a person would walk, a set of steps had been poured long ago with a care that didn't match the rest. The stairway led to a cube with a door and a window, the color of poured cement after decades of sun. There shouldn't have been electricity. There shouldn't have been a reason for light to exist there. But light was there, held behind thin curtains that puffed once with the breath of the night, and then steadied. Every rule of good sense is like a railing on a ferry. It's there, you can hold it, and in rough weather you should. But human beings are great swimmers until the cold hits. I climbed because curiosity has better shoes than fear. My brother's footsteps had the grammar of a question. I promised myself I would only look. A glance is a coin you can afford. The window had been cut too small for air, but just large enough for eyes. Inside, a table occupied the room the way a coffin occupies a chapel. 2 candles had been allowed to burn down so far that their tops looked like melted vertebrae. Between them stood a jar with the shoulders of an urn, big enough to hold a child or a voice. Someone had corseted it in red twine, layer upon layer, as if binding not an object, but a decision. Talisman papers had been brushed onto its skin, yellow, red, and another color dark as old wine, each square stamped or lettered in a script I couldn't read. The strokes angled like blades. The strings crossed them, pinning down whatever they tried to say. The smell was not of incense or rot, but of something boiled too long behind a closed door. On either side of the jar hung the last evidence of animals. Not metaphor, not rumor, but the simple fact of bodies that had been cut and left to blacken. The wingless torso of a bird, the pale loop of a piglet's spine. I felt the world recede in the way it does right before you faint, when the body starts turning down the knobs to save itself. The candles burned calmly through it all. The room had been arranged by a hand that believed arrangement could trap a storm. I did not see a person. That was the worst part. Emptiness means someone has just stepped out, or someone is waiting to step back in. The skin between my shoulder blades prickled the way it does when a hallway light clicks off by itself. I took a breath that did not help. I looked once more, because that is what you do when you think you might never look again. This is where I should confess that I wanted to touch the twine. Not to open anything, just to know if the tight line sang when plucked. Desire is another word for gravity. I backed away. We left as if we had remembered an appointment. The factory kept its black outline. Gravel made its small gunfire underfoot. The sky had stopped pretending to be blue. I thought of the driver's cigarette ember and the way human eyes shine in taillights like the eyes of nocturnal animals. I carried the image of the room in my mouth like a coin I could not swallow. He had waited. That, more than anything, felt like a trick. In places like this, people don't wait. They move on to where the meters keep running. But there he was, the cab angled toward the road as if already in motion. He had rolled the window down and the ash on his cigarette held together like a gray shell. We climbed into the back and handed our fear to the upholstery. He glanced at us in the mirror with a look that was almost tender and almost amused, the way a parent looks at children who have come home dirty from a ditch they were warned about. Only later did I recognize what was wrong. In the moment, relief dressed itself as gratitude, and gratitude covers the eyes. We paid him extra for the inconvenience of our curiosity and were delivered to a safer street where lights stayed on for respectable reasons. Inside the room, the air conditioner hummed like a chorus of crickets trapped behind metal. We didn't talk much because talk makes things fixed, and I wanted the memory to remain foggy around the edges in case I needed to deny it. Sleep is not a cure, but it is a door. Before I closed mine, I set the scene down in my head so I could pick it up again if I woke gasping. The red binding, the pressed papers, the animals wasting in their own outlines. Someone had designed it. Design means intention. Intention means the possibility of being seen. Morning let the world pretend to be harmless again. The market sounded like the market. My brother watched me as if he'd watched me walk toward a river I couldn't swim. I made coffee stronger than I needed. Fear, like caffeine, has a half-life. It softens into story if you let the day hold it long enough. This is where an ordinary life would stop, where men choose to believe that a single glimpse is enough, that curiosity once tasted is satisfied. But I have never been ordinary with my fear. It is not a poison I avoid. It is a music I turn up to understand its structure. The map in my head had acquired a new room, the little house on the hill with a light that had no right to burn. And maps invited return the way the sea invites boats that have already found shore. By noon I could feel the decision inheriting me. The distance back to the edge felt manageable in the sober glare of day. We had a cab company number now, which is to say we had a way to pretend to control our fate. The driver we'd hired last night lingered in my mind the way the silhouettes of trees linger on your eyelids after you've stared into headlights. He had known exactly where to stop, as if a line had been drawn on the road. He had asked the right, not quite questions. He had waited the way a fisherman waits after casting. In the bathroom mirror, I watched myself practice sanity and lose. This is the part of a trip where you start bargaining with the shape of your own skull. I told myself I would not step on the stair this time. I told myself the factory would be enough. I told myself that daytime emptiness is a different species of emptiness, that it can't bite. I told myself I would only look with the eyes I could close. Here is what I did not tell myself, because I did not yet know it consciously. That I wanted to prove the night wrong. That I wanted to unmask the room with the casual daylight of explanation. Find a rational layer to lay over the red twine and the rotting hinges of meat. That I wanted the world to be one thing again, not two. We left before the sun leaned west. The city unrolled and then narrowed. At the hotel entrance, the cab that arrived carried the same posture of yellow, the same worn rubber mat on the back floor. The driver wore his calm like a crisp shirt. If he recognized us, he offered no award for it. The ride hummed with that old quiet gifted by moving air. Birds stitched and unstitched the wires outside. The edge announced itself with that suddenness that edges always do. 1 minute concrete, next minute grass with a highway's long breath in the distance. He agreed to wait again. Of course he did. That is the luxury of second chances. They look so much like traps. We walked. The factory slept with its face turned away from the sun. The weeds had their own little breezes. On the hill, the small house wore shadow like a shawl, and yet, light again. Brighter, as if someone had fed the filament. I told myself it was reflection, a trick of glass. I told myself many things. I climbed halfway. Halfway is the most dangerous distance in the world. I looked through the mouth-sized window because the body loves to repeat what nearly killed it. The arrangement had changed. The jar had not moved, but 2 photographs had been added, propped like small tombstones at its base. The faces were familiar in the way your own face is familiar when you see it unexpectedly on a dark screen. One image showed me standing near the factory fence, my head turned as if someone had called my name. The other showed my brother, mid-stride, the long muscle of fear visible in the angle of his shoulders. I had not felt a flash. I had not heard a shudder. The papers around the jar had acquired new handwriting, a language I could not read. lines that curved and crossed like small roads on a stolen map. The room was not an altar. It was an address. We cleared the fence and reached the road at a run. The cab sat angled toward the highway with the engine off, the driver facing forward. I got the rear door open. My brother slid in first. I followed and pulled the handle down. The driver glanced at us in the mirror but didn't start the car. Outside, the hill window still showed light. I told him the destination. He didn't answer. His right hand moved, not to the key, but to the door lock. I kept my left hand on the handle and watched his eyes. The driver's hand rested on the door lock, a soft click of metal that sounded louder than breathing. His face stayed still, eyes fixed ahead, the mirror cutting our shapes into his line of sight. The air inside the cab had changed, no longer cool, no longer moving. It was the kind of silence that knows what it wants to happen next. Outside, the road had emptied of sound. Even the night insects had folded their wings. The light on the hill didn't flicker anymore. It had gone steady, white as a tooth. My brother's breathing was shallow beside me. I spoke again, quieter this time, telling the driver to start the car. His shoulders twitched once, like an afterthought. Then the engine turned over with a sound that felt rehearsed. We began moving downhill. The headlights brushed across weeds and a wall of dust, catching shapes that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Branches, poles, maybe a face, maybe the reflection of one. I tried to convince myself the driver's silence was only concentration. Maybe he didn't understand our words. Maybe he wanted to focus on the road. Every guess became thinner than the last. After a few minutes, the highway reappeared, pale lines painted on black stone. He didn't take it. He steered right instead, into a smaller path bordered by water ditches. The turn was too sharp to be a mistake. My brother noticed first. "Wrong way," he said under his breath, but no one answered. The driver's hand stayed exact on the wheel, his movements smooth, practiced. The smell of the night changed. Diesel, damp iron. Somewhere close, something was burning. Maybe trash, maybe something else. The cab's interior lights flickered once, and in that half-second the driver's reflection split. One face watching the road, another inside the mirror watching us. When the light steadied again, only the road remained. I touched my pocket for my phone. Gone. The space where it should have been was flat as skin. My brother reached for his own bag, then froze. The zipper was open, the contents disturbed. The sound of the tires deepened. The road was turning to gravel again. We passed a sign in a language neither of us could read. White letters that glowed faintly, the paint catching our headlights before disappearing into dust. The cab slowed, then, without warning, stopped. He didn't speak, just unlocked his door and stepped out. The keys stayed in the ignition, engine running. His door shut softly, as if not to wake something nearby. Through the windshield, I saw his outline walk forward and stop beside another shadow. For a moment they stood facing each other, two dark commas in a sentence too long to read. Then more shapes appeared behind them. 5, maybe 6. I couldn't tell if they had driven here or had been waiting all along. Their movement was wrong, synchronized, careful, like people used to working in silence. My brother whispered that we should run. But there was no direction that looked real. Fields on both sides. The black river of asphalt ahead. The only light was the pair of cab headlights cutting a shallow tunnel through the dark. I tried the handle. The lock resisted once, then yielded. We slid out, one after the other, low to the ground, keeping the car between us and the shapes. The driver's voice came from somewhere close. He was speaking that same language, steady and measured. Another voice answered, lower, almost kind. A laugh followed, short, without humor. My brother tugged my sleeve and pointed left where the road dipped into reeds. We moved. The gravel betrayed us, every step loud as glass. When I looked back, one of the figures had turned. The face was too far to see, but I felt the direction of it. like a flashlight without a beam. They began walking toward us, unhurried, as if they already knew where we would end up. We ran. The night didn't echo, it swallowed. The reeds slapped against our legs, wet and heavy. Behind us, the cab door slammed once, twice. The headlights shifted, swinging toward the field. I could hear voices calling to each other, the syllables cutting the dark into pieces. The first shot was not a gun. It was metal striking metal, something blunt hitting the car, a warning or a signal. Then came footsteps, many, rhythm keeping time with our breath. My brother stumbled, caught himself, kept going. We found a dirt path veering uphill and took it, lungs tearing, the air turning thicker with every stride. At the top stood an old water tower, rust climbing its legs. We hid beneath it, the iron warm from the day's heat. The noise below us grew smaller, scattered. Someone shouted once, a word that could have been our names if the world had learned to pronounce them. We waited. Minutes stretched until they felt like hours. The hill behind us overlooked the factory, a dull rectangle against the dim sky. The window in the little house still burned. From that distance, the light looked calm, deliberate, as if nothing had changed. My brother pressed his forehead to the metal beam, eyes closed. Sweat ran down his cheek like ink. We didn't speak. Speech would make sound, and sound would make us visible. When the noise finally died, we crept back toward the road. The cab was gone. In its place, faint tire tracks led toward the direction of the town, but also away from it, looping back into the dark. The ground was soft, muddied by more than one vehicle. We followed the track until we found the edge of the main highway, or something like it, paved again. Lines faded, a faint smell of salt on the wind. Headlights appeared from the opposite direction, a small pickup carrying crates of vegetables. I stepped into the road, waving my arms until it slowed. The driver looked confused when he saw us. Two foreigners covered in dirt, breathing like we'd run through a storm. He spoke quickly, words spilling too fast to catch. I repeated one word I knew, town. He nodded, gestured to the back. We climbed onto the open bed among the boxes. The truck moved forward, steady, every jolt like a heartbeat. No one followed. The night opened wider, less like a trap, more like a vacuum. I looked back once, saw only the absence of light where the hill had been. My brother's hands were shaking as he gripped the side rail, the knuckles pale in the dim glow. It took nearly an hour to reach the outskirts again. Houses appeared, scattered, some with radios murmuring through open windows. The driver stopped near a roadside stand and motioned for us to get off. He didn't ask for money. He only pointed down the street toward a cluster of neon signs and said a single word that meant safe. We walked. The city didn't feel like a city anymore. It felt borrowed, like a stage after a play. The air smelled of fried food and gasoline, a mixture that should have been comforting but wasn't. At the corner, a police kiosk glowed blue. We stepped inside. The officer on duty blinked when he saw us. He listened, or tried to, while we pieced together our story with broken nouns and desperate gestures. He called another officer who spoke better English. They led us into a room with a flickering ceiling fan, poured water into paper cups, and asked us to start again from the beginning. We told them about the factory, the hill, the house, the light, the photographs. We told them about the cab driver and the men who had followed. We left out nothing we could remember. The officer listened without expression, writing in a notebook so old the pages curled. When we finished, he looked at his partner and they exchanged a few quiet words. Finally, he said, "You stay hotel tonight. We look tomorrow." That was all. No escort, no ride, just a gesture toward the door. We stepped back into the heat, which felt thicker now, and found another taxi. A real one this time, its dashboard plastered with stickers and small plastic saints. The driver nodded when we gave him the hotel name, started the meter, and turned up the radio until the speakers trembled. Back in the room, the air conditioner was still humming where we'd left it. My brother collapsed onto the bed without undressing. I went to the window. The city below looked ordinary, its streets threaded with headlights. In the glass, I could see our reflections superimposed on the night, the same two faces from the photographs. I checked the time, just past 2. My throat ached from thirst. I found a bottle of water on the desk, drank half, and set it down. The bottle rocked slightly, as if the table were trembling. Then the lights blinked once, the same way they had in the cab, and steadied. I walked to the door and slid the chain across. The sound was too loud. My brother had already fallen asleep, or was pretending to. I lay down on the other bed, staring at the ceiling, counting each flicker of the fluorescent tube. Somewhere outside, an engine started. Small, steady, familiar. Tires rolled across gravel, not pavement. I knew that sound. I knew the rhythm of that motor, the pause between shifts. It stopped beneath our window. The headlights didn't point toward the street. They pointed up at the building. I didn't move. The engine stayed on. That's how the night returned to us, quiet and exact, as if it had simply been waiting for permission. The sound stayed under the window, idling at a patient rhythm. No horn, no voices, just the mechanical pulse of an engine holding its breath. I counted the seconds between each vibration. The wall trembled faintly, the window glass answering in thin circles. My brother turned over once in his sleep, if it was sleep, and stilled again. I got up, careful not to disturb the mattress springs, and moved toward the curtain. The city's hum outside had folded into that one note of idling. I parted the fabric 2 fingers wide. A cab waited on the curb directly below. The same color, same dull scratches on the trunk, the same faint dent on the rear bumper. Headlights upward, steady, white against the concrete of our floor. Through the windshield, I could see the faint outline of a face resting motionless against the headrest. It might have been the same driver. It might have been anyone. The engine's rhythm stayed perfectly constant. No acceleration, no impatience, no fatigue. I let the curtain fall and stepped back. The room regained its silence in layers. The air conditioner's hum, my own breathing, the distant fan blades from the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed. The air was dense, as if the room had been sealed. After a moment, I stood again, took the television remote, and pressed the power button. Static. Gray snow swallowing the screen, hissing without a signal. The remote clicked uselessly. No channel, no broadcast, just the static, almost syncing with the rhythm of the motor below. My brother stirred, opened his eyes halfway, confusion replacing language. I signaled him to stay still. He pushed himself upright anyway, rubbing his face. I pointed to the window. He listened, and the blood left his expression. We didn't need words. We gathered our bags slowly, leaving what was too heavy to matter. Wallet, passport, one phone that still had a charge, and nothing that made sound. We moved to the door. I pressed my ear against it. No footsteps in the corridor. Still, the hallway light under the door seemed too bright, as if it came from a different hour. We opened it. The hinge breathed once, a long metallic exhale. The corridor was empty. Doors closed, the same patterned carpet, air cooler than it should be. Down the hall, the elevator light blinked irregularly. Numbers climbing without sound. It was moving, but no one had pressed the call button. We turned away from it and headed for the stairs. Each floor we passed felt like the previous one rewritten. Same wallpaper, same framed photographs of beaches that didn't exist here. The stairwell smelled faintly of detergent and rust. Halfway down, the building's hum changed pitch. Lights dimmed, returned, dimmed again. By the time we reached the lobby, the night clerk's chair behind the counter was empty. A cup of coffee sat half-finished, steam long gone. The front doors stood half open, one of them swaying slightly in the breeze from the street. Outside, the cab had gone. The pavement still glistened with the shape of its headlights, like burns that hadn't cooled. Farther down the road, red tail lights curved around the corner and disappeared. For a second I thought it was over, that it had only been coincidence, paranoia, exhaustion. Then the radio in the lobby behind us crackled alive. A male voice speaking that same language, calm and deliberate, as if giving directions. My brother froze. The words repeated twice, then the transmission cut off. We stepped into the street. The night was humid again, clouds pressing low. At the intersection, a sign pointed toward the coastal highway. We followed it, keeping to the shadows. Every few minutes, a scooter or a small truck passed, lights washing over us, then gone. None of them stopped. The city that had felt crowded 2 days ago now looked hollowed out. Shops closed, shutters locked, the air itself uncertain whether it belonged to day or night. We walked for nearly an hour before the sound came back. Tires on gravel, slow, deliberate. Behind us. We didn't look at first. We just listened as it matched our pace, closing the distance grain by grain. When we finally turned, the same headlights found us again, perfect in alignment, too exact to be coincidence. The car rolled closer, stopping a few meters away. The window lowered halfway. A voice called something low, foreign, and patient. My brother stepped back. I stayed still. The voice repeated, then switched to broken English. "Come, hotel problem. Police call the phrasing was wrong, the kind that comes from someone repeating memorized lines." I didn't answer. The door of the cab opened slowly, almost politely, and a figure stepped out. The driver, or someone dressed like him. The posture identical. Hands clasped loosely at the stomach, head tilted just enough to suggest patience. He gestured toward the car again. "Come," he said softer. Behind him, another door opened, and a second shape emerged, taller, carrying something long wrapped in cloth. They stood waiting, as if time itself worked for them. We turned and ran. The first 100 meters were easy. The body always obeys panic. After that came the noise. Boots, gravel, the sound of air breaking around movement. We cut through an alley between warehouses, across a narrow lot of sand and discarded cables. A dog barked once, then was silent. Behind us, the engine roared to life, headlights swinging wildly across the walls. We reached a chain-link fence, climbed, dropped to the other side. My hands tore open on the wire. Blood made the metal slick. We kept moving. A river appeared without warning, black, wide, its surface broken by reeds. A small pedestrian bridge crossed it, planks missing, rail bent. We took it one step at a time, wood groaning under weight. Halfway across, the engine stopped. The headlights went out. The silence was worse. On the far bank, abandoned storage units lined the path, doors rusted, padlocks split. We hid inside the nearest one, pulling the door almost shut. The air smelled of rope, salt, and dry mud. Through the gap I could see the opposite shore, faint light moving, flashlights or phones searching slowly. Voices carried across the water, faint, measured, calling names that weren't ours. We waited until the light drifted away. When we stepped outside again, the horizon was turning gray. Dawn. Birds began their mechanical repetition, pretending the world was simple again. We followed the river downstream until it met a road. A delivery truck passed, horns soft, the driver blinking at us in confusion before stopping. We climbed into the open back without explanation. He didn't ask questions. People who live near danger seldom do. The city returned in fragments. Towers, billboards, traffic lights frozen on red. We got off near a cluster of embassies, the kind of district that keeps its own power during outages. The air smelled cleaner, controlled. Security guards at the gate stared but didn't stop us. We found the building marked with our flag and stepped through the checkpoint. Inside, air conditioning erased the night from our skin. An officer led us to a small room with metal chairs and glass walls. We told the story again, piece by piece, trying not to sound insane. He listened, taking notes, eyes narrowing only once when I described the photographs inside the concrete house. When I finished, He leaned back and tapped his pen. "You'll stay here today," he said. "We'll contact local police." He nodded toward another door. Inside was a smaller waiting area with a vending machine, 2 cots, and a clock that had stopped at 3:47. We sat. No one spoke. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the space between seconds. Hours passed. Officials came, asked the same questions, recorded the same details, promised follow-up. They gave us new phones and called the hotel to retrieve our belongings. The manager answered but claimed the room was empty when staff entered. Our luggage, passports, everything else, gone. Evening came like an old bruise. They arranged a flight for the next day and moved us to a secured guest house nearby. We were given dinner we couldn't eat, beds we couldn't rest in. I kept the window closed but couldn't keep my eyes from it. The streetlights outside flickered in sets of 3, forming a pattern that repeated every few minutes. 2 short, 1 long. It looked too deliberate. I watched until I began to hear the rhythm instead of see it. My brother finally slept, or something like it. I sat beside the desk lamp, writing notes for the report they would ask again tomorrow. Every detail mattered. The number of men, the shape of the hill, the color of the twine. I tried to remember whether the jar had truly moved, whether the photos had been freshly printed or old. Memory is unreliable. It develops its own negatives. Just before dawn, I heard another engine. Different model this time, lower hum, diesel instead of gasoline. It slowed near the building, paused, then rolled on. I waited for the sound to fade, but it stayed within range, circling once, twice, before disappearing. When the sky began to pale, I realized I hadn't closed my eyes once. My brother stirred, asked what time it was. I told him morning. We both knew that wasn't an answer. We met the embassy officer again at 7. He looked tired in a way that comes from paperwork, not fear. "Police found nothing," he said. "No factory, no address. The area you described, vacant land." He waited for a reaction, but neither of us gave him one. He continued, "You'll fly home tonight." Better to leave early. He signed a document, handed us temporary travel IDs, and left the room. We stood in silence, paper still warm from the printer. Outside the window the sun had risen, but the light looked wrong, too white, too even, like the bulb that had burned inside the concrete house. I looked at my brother. He avoided the window entirely. We packed our few items, checked the hallway twice, and waited for the car that would take us to the airport. When it arrived, the driver was new. At least, that's what they told us. The sedan was government-issued, black, clean, unmarked. The driver wore sunglasses and said nothing. He started the engine, and the sound that filled the air was smooth, practiced, steady. The same rhythm that had waited beneath our hotel window. The car moved forward, turning toward the highway that led away from the city. Neither of us looked back. The rearview mirror tilted once, catching our faces in its narrow frame. I kept my eyes on the road, counting the seconds between each breath. The car held its line on the highway, the horizon sliding backward in long gray ribbons. No music, no radio. Only the constant mechanical breathing that filled the space where thought should have been. My brother sat beside me, arms folded, head turned toward the window. The world outside moved like film projected at half speed. Palm trees bending, electric poles repeating at perfect intervals, a landscape rehearsing the act of being harmless. We passed the city limits within 20 minutes. Buildings gave way to open fields, fields to strips of bare dirt, then to water lying still in ditches. The smell of salt arrived again, faint but precise. Somewhere beyond the haze, the ocean waited. I tried to convince myself that this was ending, that every mile was distance, not a circle. The driver never spoke. Once, when we slowed behind a truck, I leaned forward to glance at the dashboard. No visible ID, no name, no registration slip. The rearview mirror tilted slightly downward. I could see only the top of his head, hair trimmed short, unmoving. I sat back and counted the time between highway signs. The sky ahead was the color of metal left in rain. When the airport appeared, a row of hangars and low terminals surrounded by chain link, it felt staged, as if assembled overnight just for us. The driver stopped outside the main entrance, stepped out, opened our doors one by one, then returned to the seat without looking up. He waited until we were inside before pulling away. The sound of the engine receded but didn't vanish. Inside the terminal, air conditioning replaced the world again. The floor was spotless, shining in a way that refused reflection. An airline official recognized the paperwork, led us through security without lines or questions. Each gesture felt prearranged. The scan of our IDs, the polite nods, the printed tickets. Our flight number appeared on the screen. 2047, destination written in letters that suddenly looked unfamiliar. We sat by the gate for nearly 2 hours. Other passengers arrived, voices blending into the ordinary noise of travel. I tried to measure safety by their calm, but calm is only a costume. Anyone can wear it. My brother closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. When boarding began, he moved quickly, as if afraid the plane might change its mind. We found our seats near the back. The cabin lights glowed the same color as hospital corridors. I fastened my belt and let the weight of the seat press against me. Outside, rain began to form without warning, fat drops hitting the window like fingers tapping for attention. The runway blurred. Engines deepened. The plane lifted and gravity released its grip inch by inch. For the first time in days, the noise around us belonged to something predictable. I let the vibration fill my chest, the hum steady and impersonal. Below, the coastline shrank into a pattern of lights fading under clouds. The world became distance. I closed my eyes. When I woke, hours had passed. Cabin darkened, shades down. Passengers sleeping in synchronized postures, heads tilted, mouths half open. The only light came from the aisle floor, a thin path of white running forward. I checked the screen on the seat ahead. 3 hours until landing. My brother was awake, staring at his reflection in the window. His expression had emptied itself. He turned suddenly, whispering that someone was standing near the galley. I followed his gaze. A silhouette, broad shoulders, uniform jacket, stood half hidden where the service curtain hung open. At first, I assumed it was a crew member, but the shape never moved. No shift of weight, no gesture, no blink. The longer I watched, the more certain I became that whoever it was wasn't watching the aisle but us. I pressed the call button. A flight attendant appeared within seconds, smiling too brightly. I pointed toward the galley. She looked, then back at me, confusion creasing her face. "No one there," she said quietly, her accent neutral. When I looked again, the space was empty. The curtain hung flat. She smiled once more and walked away. The air between my ribs tightened, as if memory itself had muscle. 3 hours later, landing gear touched asphalt with a soft thud. The cabin lights came up, yellow and forgiving. Everyone moved at once, the small chaos of arrival. Bags unzipping, buckles snapping, phones turning on. We waited until the aisle cleared, then followed the line toward daylight. At the end of the jet bridge, 2 men in suits waited beside a sign bearing our names. Embassy staff, they said, here for final processing. They spoke English too cleanly to belong to either country. They guided us through customs, carried our forms, arranged our transport. Their politeness was exact, measured to the millimeter. Outside, another car waited. A dark sedan, windows tinted deep enough to swallow the sky. The driver nodded once, said nothing, and started the engine. We merged into morning traffic. The city felt too bright after so many nights of humidity and dirt. Glass buildings, digital billboards, clean air-conditioned wind pushing through vents. My brother leaned his head against the seat and closed his eyes. I watched the passing signs, familiar language again, yet somehow foreign. When we reached our apartment, Everything looked untouched. Mail stacked neatly, windows closed, fridge still humming. The life we had left behind had been waiting exactly where we dropped it. We unpacked what little we had. Then silence. The kind that doesn't belong to a room, but to something watching it. I turned on the TV for background noise. The channel showed a travel program, palm trees and ocean. The host's voice described a coastal region, tropical humidity, a hill with abandoned buildings and local folklore. The caption read, "Filmed on location 2 years ago." The camera panned across a gray structure at the base of a hill. Familiar angles, familiar decay. Then the small concrete house appeared, its single window glowing white. The footage froze for a moment, the frame catching that same jar on the table. The host continued talking, unaware of what filled the shot behind her. My brother walked out of his room, remote in hand. He changed the channel without looking at me. News now, weather updates, finance numbers, nothing unusual, but the silence that followed felt heavier. He said he was going to sleep. I nodded, knowing he wouldn't. That night I woke to a faint sound, water dripping, rhythmic, deliberate. I followed it to the kitchen, a leak from the ceiling landing in the sink, each drop echoing hollow. When I looked up, I saw a thin crack running across the plaster, damp spreading outward like veins. I turned off the light and went back to my room. The smell of salt lingered, impossible in this city. I sat on the bed, opened the embassy-issued phone. No messages, only one saved contact labeled Emergency Liaison. I scrolled through the photo gallery. Empty. Then, for a second, an image flashed, too brief to register fully. I reopened the gallery. Nothing. Black screen, then home display again. I set the phone face down. By morning, the water stain on the ceiling had doubled. My brother didn't come out of his room. When I knocked, he answered that he was fine, voice thin and distant. I left him alone. I went outside for air. The street looked normal, people walking dogs, delivery vans idling, sunlight reflecting off windows. But every time I blinked, the edges of the world seemed to darken, as if the brightness were a layer being peeled away. I bought coffee from a corner kiosk. The barista's radio played a local talk show, cheerful and fast. Between segments, the station cut to an advertisement, voices in another language. The same cadence, the same intonation I'd heard from the driver that night on the hill. The jingle ended with a phrase repeated twice, the same rhythm as the jar's red twine. I left the cup untouched on the counter. Back home, my brother's door stood open. The room was empty. His passport lay on the desk, wallet beside it. The window was unlatched, curtains moving with the wind. I called his name once, then again. Silence, then the faint sound of traffic below. I ran to the balcony. Nothing but the street, ordinary as always. I called his phone. Ringtone from somewhere inside the apartment, not outside. I followed it to the bathroom. The sound came from behind the shower curtain. I pulled it back. Nothing. No one. Phone lying on the floor, screen cracked, camera lens shattered. It was still recording, timer running past 30 minutes. I lifted it. The preview image showed darkness, faint motion, a frame of ceiling plaster. Then, in one corner, a shape began to form. Pale, rounded, with a reflection like glass catching candlelight. The feed cut off. I replayed it. The same. No sound except the faint hum of an engine in the background. That same rhythm, steady, patient. I turned off the phone and set it on the sink. Outside, thunder moved across the distance. Or maybe it was something else. The walls seemed to pulse with the same beat. I walked to the living room window. Down on the street, cars passed, pedestrians moved, life continued. Then I saw it. A cab parked on the opposite curb, facing upward toward our building. Headlights off this time. Inside, a figure sat perfectly still, hands resting on the wheel. When a truck passed, its reflection flashed against the windshield, showing two faces instead of one. mine and my brother's side by side, watching back. The engine started. The headlights came on. The cab pulled away from the curb, slow and deliberate, merging into traffic without sound. I stayed at the window until it disappeared among the lights. Then I turned and looked at the ceiling again. The crack had widened. The damp now shaped like a map of a country I had already left once. Somewhere far away, under another sky, a single house on a hill was still lit, its window burning white against the dark. The world hadn't ended there. It had only found a way to follow. I didn't leave the window that night. The street emptied itself hour by hour, until only the sound of rain remained, soft, even, without wind. The crack in the ceiling widened silently. At its center, something darker than water had begun to form. I watched it gather shape the way a photograph develops in chemical bath, slow, inevitable. By dawn, the stain had spread above every doorway. The air carried the same metallic humidity as the night we ran from the hill. I knocked again on my brother's door. Still open. The bed untouched. The air smelled of salt and burnt wax. On the table near the couch sat his phone. The screen was black, but light pulsed faintly underneath, as if something were breathing behind it. I picked it up. The battery was dead, yet the warmth of recent use clung to it. I set it down and felt the vibration continue through the wood, a low, mechanical heartbeat. Outside, the morning was gray and obedient. I stepped into it without thinking, shirt half-buttoned, shoes untied. The air was heavier than before, pressing against the chest like unseen hands. Cars passed but made no sound. Every license plate was blank. Every face in passing windows looked forward, never at me. At the intersection, a cab idled by the curb. Same model, same dent near the rear bumper, same unlit sign on the roof. The driver's silhouette was there, head bowed slightly, hands steady on the wheel. When I stepped closer, the window slid down halfway. Inside smelled of plastic and rusted air conditioning. No greeting, no question, only the soft click of the door unlock. I opened it. The seat was dry. The same thin layer of dust clung to the dashboard. A line of light from the windshield crossed my knees like a blade. I sat down and closed the door. The latch engaged with a sound I already knew. The driver shifted the gear without turning his head. The car pulled into the street. No destination asked, none given. City blocks passed in sequence, each corner bending exactly like the last. The world outside began to blur, not from speed, but from absence. Shops dissolved into walls, walls into outlines, outlines into gray. Every traffic light stayed green, every sign faced away. The hum of the engine grew deeper, a vibration that resonated in bone. My reflection in the window thinned, color draining from it. Behind me, another outline began to form on the glass. My brother's profile, eyes open, unmoving. Neither of us spoke. Neither needed to. The engine carried the conversation now. We left the city limits. No checkpoints this time, no exits, only road. It curved without end, bordered by fields that had never decided to exist. The air darkened, though the clock on the dashboard still read morning. Rain began again, soft, symmetrical. Somewhere ahead, the terrain lifted. The same hill, though I couldn't have said how. It rose out of the mist exactly as it had before, every contour rehearsed. The car slowed. The driver turned once, enough for me to see his face. Not new, not old, but rearranged into the sum of every face that had watched us that night. Then he looked forward again and stopped the engine. The door locks clicked open. Outside, the air held the smell of wet soil and candle smoke. I stepped out. The sound of the sea was closer now, or maybe below. Grass reached my knees. Up the slope, the concrete house waited, window still glowing. I began to walk. The mud took my weight quietly, as if remembering it. Each step felt pre-written. At the doorway, the hinges gave a low sigh. Inside, the air was dry and cold. The same table stood in the center, the jar still wrapped in red twine. The candles were shorter now. Their wax congealed into shapes like human ears. A faint hum filled the space, steady, identical to the car's engine. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. On the wall opposite, 2 photographs hung side by side. Both were new. In the first, my brother and I sat in a car, faces turned toward the camera. In the second, only the driver remained. The seat beside him was empty. The floorboards trembled, not from footsteps, from breath. The window's light swelled until it erased shadow, until every object flattened into white. I felt the temperature drop through my shoes, through my bones. A voice, or the shape of one, formed inside the hum. It carried no language, only direction. I turned toward the door, but there was no door now, only the slope of a corridor leading down, carved into concrete, the walls pulsing faintly as if alive. The air smelled of salt and electricity. I followed it. Steps descended endlessly, each one lit by small bulbs the color of dying stars. Somewhere below, machinery rotated with slow precision. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a chamber. Rows of identical jars lined the walls, each bound in red. Some glowed faintly, some not at all. The hum was louder here, structured, like breathing synced across hundreds of bodies. In the center of the room stood a single chair. A figure sat in it, head lowered, hands resting on the armrests. My brother. He didn't move as I approached. His skin reflected the same gray light as the jars. I called his name once. He raised his head. The eyes that met mine were not surprised. He spoke without sound, mouth forming shapes I didn't recognize. Behind him, one jar began to vibrate, then another, then all. The red threads tightened. The lids lifted one by one, exhaling light like breath escaping lungs. The hum rose into pitch, collapsing air around it. My knees buckled. The light filled everything, floor, ceiling, skin. I couldn't tell whether I was standing or falling. When it stopped, there was no sound left, only stillness that hummed of its own accord. I opened my eyes. The room was gone. So was the hill, the car, the city. Only white remained, endless and without direction. Somewhere within it, a faint mechanical rhythm continued, like an engine idling, waiting for a signal. I turned toward it. A single line of light extended forward, infinite and narrow. At its end, a cab waited, headlights off, door open. The driver inside did not move. Neither did I. The hum deepened once, as if drawing breath. Then it stayed that way, perpetual, patient, endless. If the silence still follows you after this story, don't turn around, just listen. More voices are waiting in the dark. Stories that haven't ended, names that haven't been spoken yet. If you want to hear them, stay, and let the witch find you again.